Hey cousins, welcome to Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas.
Welcome, cousins, to this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. I'm your host, Cornell Wright, the People's Lobbyist, and today we're going to talk about two subjects, both of which are important to us, but let me just give you a little bit of brown liquor clarification on each of those. One is the January 6th activity, that insurrection, and the second is the current inflation question and what's going on to our understanding. Join me. So, cousins, first let's talk about inflation. So, inflation is one of these things that nobody likes. I had a chance to go on a little road trip, a couple weeks ago, and on my road trip, I started off by paying $3.30 some whatever, for a tank of diesel fuel. On my final fill up, I paid $5.49, okay, within less of 3-4 weeks. And so you might say, cousins, well, what's going on with that? And I'm saying, well, people are talking about inflation and all that kind of good stuff. But let me also give you a little bit of background on that. I had a friend of mine who used to work for Halliburton, a big oil company that's involved with a whole bunch of things. And he said that from the time it takes to get oil out of the ground and delivered to your processed, refined, shipped around the world, whatever's taken care of, shipped through pipelines, all that kind of infrastructure to move it from somewhere in the ground to where it goes into your gasoline tank is 6 months. 6 months, cousins. So when you think about it and you compare that 6 months number to people saying, oh, well, gee, why don't we turn on more production in the United States to reduce the oil prices? And what does everybody say? There's a 6-month lead time. You with me, cousins? So you can't just turn on the faucet because all those cousins who own the companies, the price wasn't right, the price of oil, they weren't being able to make enough money. They weren't doing the job in that regards until the price goes up and now it's worthwhile for them to go pump oil. It takes 6 months, cousins. So on one side, it takes 6 months. On the other side, that gallon of gasoline that was already in the tank, let's call that capitalism, cousins, because that's what happened to that. So a little bit of profit taking. So the other thing is because people talk about inflation. Well, inflation is multifaceted. And when you listen to all the different reports, and now I haven't listened to all of them, but I've listened to a few, as I'm sure you have, because you can't get away from it. They talk about gasoline inflation. They talked about how the whole question of supply and demand, that's all economic talk, which says that, we want more hamburgers than they can produce, so the price of hamburgers go up, right? Supply and demand, make it simple. But there's other aspects of what is impacting that demand. I mean, not the demand, because we all want stuff, right? We still want stuff, to buy it from clothes to cars to televisions, etc. But now we have additional complexity. Why? Because of what COVID has done to us and the rest of the world. Because China has a zero COVID tolerance policy, when they identify a problem with COVID in a given city or whatever, they shut down the entire city. That city might, in fact, be producing some of our products that we want to buy. Therefore, the demand that we want for that given item is not going to be met by that supply because those people are shut down and not working or the plants are closed. Make sense? And there's no response for that. The other is, when you think about it, there's also a question of, that's a supply chain question that's happening around the world and continuing to happen. Sometimes we can't get certain products because where they were coming from, people slowed down. Maybe companies went out of business as a result of COVID. So you can go back to whatever were the reasons why COVID became so significant in our lives, our lack of preparation, our lack of engagement, our lack of accurate communications about COVID, which further slowed us all down, right? Sure it did. So now, then there's the other part about inflation. Well, there's such thing as capitalism, right? And if it says that there's a price I can afford, or people are willing to pay, then that's going to be the new price. And that's going to cause inflation. Okay? So that's all a part of it as well. But let me offer another aspect that you don't hear as much about in regards to this whole deflation conversation. And there's something you can do about this one and participate. when you start looking at the way the United States government is working, our central bank, which is the Federal Reserve, has the responsibility, and let me read this to make sure it's clear. It says that monetary policy addresses interest rates and the supply of money in circulation and is generally managed by a central bank, i.e. the Federal Reserve. You hear about them raising interest rates and that kind of stuff, keeping relatively low interest rates over the last 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years in order to what? Spur the economy, keep things going, keep things growing. Now they're starting to increase that. So it's going to start to have increased rates in regards to how much people have to pay for various insurances, pay for interest rates on credit cards, which is already a pretty high rate. So they've been getting money for almost zero and charging, 20-some%. But hey, that's the way that goes, right? Further goes on, fiscal policy addresses taxation and government spending and is generally determined by government legislation. Now, for the past 2-3 years, the Federal Reserve has been saying we're almost out in regards to the things we can do to help maintain, bolster, and keep the economy going. It's up to Congress and the executive branch, based upon the recommendations coming from them, to go to Congress to pass legislations regarding what? Taxation and regarding government spending. So what that says to you, cousins, is there's all these reasons for inflation, but one of them is also our federal government, i.e. Congress to be specific, not passing legislation, i.e. allocating money for projects and or bills in order to what? Help the cousins. All right? So when you hear that, cousins, throw that one in too. Okay, we got supply chain, we got profit taking, we got people being out of business, but we also have our Congress not acting on our behalf. And so you have to ask yourself, so who's holding up some of the legislation going through and preventing the money from flowing through the federal government, which could in some ways start to mediate and reduce the impact of inflation? You have to look at that, cousins. Look at your congressman, look at your senator, and see how they are doing in order to do what? Support you and support the government and the entire country in regards to that movement toward minimizing inflation. Because you hear everybody talking about it, but nobody wants to take responsibility for it, right, cousins? Inflation is not a natural thing. It happens because of factors that are out there, some of which I've talked about, and some of which are still out there that I haven't talked about because I'm not an economist, but I know a little bit about business. You with me, cousins? So there's that aspect of it. Talk to and find out what your congressman person is doing, what your senators are doing, and see whether they are holding things up from moving and flowing or being able to help things move and being progressive and get things done. Progressive in the sense of not progressive in regards to politics, but just moving the job forward and getting their job done. And it's a simple question. If I don't like something, if you come up with a proposal, cousins, and you say, let's go get pizza on Friday night, and I say no, then the responsibility is on me to give a better idea than going to get pizza, right? Because we're hungry. It's Friday night. What are we going to do? So if I don't want to get pizza, I need to come up with a better idea. If I'm not coming up with a better idea, am I really doing my job? Simple as that, cousins. Talk to your Congress people, see what they're doing for you. Talk to your senators, see what they're doing for you. Just look them up. Look them up. See what they've been voting on. See what they're saying about some of the things that are now hemmed up in the Congress. And so my second point is moving on, cousins, and, this is getting on my nerves. January 6th, which we all saw on TV. We were watching it. Maybe you didn't see it on TV, but it was on the newsreels. We know the reports about what happened. We saw, the guards and the police officers for the Capitol being assaulted by rioters, spurned on by the former president. That's what we saw, right? Cousins, people are trying to make that as though it wasn't a thing. It was a very serious thing. It was a thing in which our Constitution and our form of government was in the balance. If you think that it wasn't serious, go back and look at some of the faces of those people, the congresspersons and the senators, as the look on their faces. If they thought it was a friendly group of people, they would not have acted that way, nor be in so much of a hurry to get out. Come on, cousins, you know the deal. This is called gaslighting. We talked about it in prior episodes. So let me be very clear about this. Everybody from the former president on down who participated in January 6th was trying to subvert our Constitution and are therefore criminals. One more time, just to be clear. Everybody who participated in that activity were being criminals and trying to subvert our Constitution, whether they were fully knowledgeable or they weren't. It's like if you go out with one of your buddies and somebody goes in and robs something. You are also a robber. You don't say, well, gee, I was just in the car and I didn't know what was going on. I just kind of showed up, so now I'm not a robber. Yes, you are. By the law, you're a robber. And you should be punished as such. Those people are trying to subvert our Constitution. The presidential election in 2020 was not stolen, but it was attempted to be stolen afterwards, and we have all sorts of evidence to prove that that was the case. Also now referred to as the big lie, in which former President Trump is saying that his election was stolen. No, it wasn't. He lost. He can't admit to losing, but he lost. And then the final act was trying to do any number of things, which we now know from the facts, to take over January 6th. So, cousins, it's not non-patriotic to want to have justice. It's not being a good political person or supporting your party to want justice. But it is non-democratic and non-supportive of the United States to want to support an authoritarian regime and have something taken over here in the United States. And that's where we are. So when you start listening and seeing that, cousins, just talk to me. If you think there's another way of seeing this, a crime's a crime, right? We saw it play out. And now you're seeing people come up with all sorts of legal reasons why we don't want to be subpoenaed, we don't want to have records released, we don't want to do this. All those things are stalling tactics, cousins. If you are in the right, you want to have your day in court so you can tell everybody and clear your name, wouldn't you? Think about that. If you are right and you got all this information going on about you, don't you want to have your name cleared? As opposed to saying, oh, let's just take our time and we're just going to slow down and that sort of thing. And there's already been conversation prior to where the former president said, if the Justice Department just did this, I can handle the rest of this stuff with the members in Congress. So what's trying to happen is trying to have a new election next year in which you might get some people who want to what? Sweep all the January 6th activity under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen and that our country wasn't attempting to have a takeover. That's wrong, cousins. That's a bad idea. And so I'm just asking you all to start looking at it with that lens. Wrong is wrong. We saw it. That was not fictitious. It was not made up. We saw it live on TV. And we saw, and it's on the record, how the Congress had to disband, leave, go to security, and then come back and finish their business by authorizing the Electoral College votes late at night. Come on, cousins. Let's stop playing. Let's get over this and get back to the more important things by running our country and making it better for all of us. All right, cousins, you take care. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. You take care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
We are the people. We are the people.
Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas is intended for the participation of responsible adults of legal drinking age who wish to engage in substantive virtual discussions and social drinking for entertainment purposes only. Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas does not advocate the abuse of alcoholic beverages. Choosing to participate in any of the drinking activities shared in the program should be made with moderation and caution and is the sole responsibility of the user.